In this video, we're going to be going over the 6 auditing strategies that you can use in your next audit. If it's your first time here, I'm Subhi. I'm a consultant, trainer, and auditor, and I've audited on behalf of some of the biggest medical device and pharma companies in the world. I'm also the co-creator with Andy Robertson of the CQA Masterclass, and anyone who signs up for the class, they get a copy of the CQA Exam Day Guide, which gives you everything you need in terms of information to be able to pass the exam. What we're covering today is actually out of chapter 6 of the body of knowledge, which is focused on the preparation and planning of the audit. Once you have an audit plan in place, the next decision you have to make as an auditor is how do you actually approach that audit? The CQA body of knowledge highlights 6 strategies: the tracing method, the process approach, the process-based method, the department method, the element method, and the discovery method. And understanding these is really important. So let's jump into the first one, which is the tracing method. The tracing method follows a piece of evidence. And so what that means is there are 2 different approaches that you can take. You can take a forward tracing approach, forward, or you can take a backward tracing approach. And when you're following a forward approach, you're going from input to output. And when you're following a backward approach, you're going from output to input. And so to use a practical example, if you wanted to audit how a company controls their materials, you could start at receipt of raw materials, go to incoming inspection, then to production, then to product release, right? And so you could say, show me the incoming, I want to see a batch of incoming material, how it flowed in through incoming inspection, how you took it into production, how you did your material reconciliation and all of that, how it flowed into production, what was left over. And then I want to see your release documentation, your batch records, etc. Okay. Or you could start at the batch record and then go backwards into production, backwards into incoming inspection, backwards into the receipt of the material. And so some examples of when this can be used is if you're looking at stuff like complaints, if you're looking at deviations, recalls, etc., a process where there's a traceability element to it. And what you're asking yourself here is, did the process work for this example? And so that is the tracing method. Now, moving into the second one, which is the process approach. And in this case, you're trying to follow the workflow. And so you're evaluating the flow of interactions. In other words, you're trying to follow how the work is done. And so what you're asking yourself here is, how is the work actually done? You could think of this as like an audit Gemba walk, and you're trying to look at the flow of different processes into each other, and the distinction between the process flow, the tracing method that we just went over, and the process approach is that here you're less concerned about a specific example and more trying to understand how the different steps feed into each other. And so you can find multiple examples of each steps or each sub processes, but your intent is to try and understand how does the process work and not just evaluate whether or not you have a compliant process like with the tracing method. And so this works in similar scenarios where you're trying to look at complaints or production, what have you, but here you're looking for inefficiencies, bottlenecks, etc., and trying to find where are the interaction points between step A, B, and C, and where are the inefficiency bottlenecks. Moving on to process-based management. And process-based management is similar to the process method, but it's really focused on connecting the dots. And it is looking at the major connections between bigger processes and how they interact in a quality system. And so here you're looking at, does the overall process and QMS work together effectively? And so you may be looking here at something like a complaint and how it floats into CAPA, then risk management, then a design change, and then management review. And what are all the different touch points that are related, and are they all saying the same thing? And the process-based approach is most commonly used in situations like ISO 9001 or 13485 cert audits. It's used in internal audits where they're looking at large chunks or the entire QMS, looking at global process interactions, or looking at the overall QMS. Now, the next one we're going to cover is the department method. The department method narrows the audit scope to a specific single function or department. This strategy helps give insight into a specific work area, and the way that the audit goes might focus on, say, whether or not all manufacturing personnel have the appropriate training that they need. Here you may look at, are all doc reviewers trained on X document in this department? These tend to be really focused. The next one we're going to cover is the element method. And the element method is in its name because it's focused on one quality system element. And in doing so, you may say, I want to look at training or doc control or design control everywhere. And so the focus is not so much on a department or a function or interaction of processes. You're looking at global for one element. And the main thing you're trying to get out of this one is an understanding of how well is the requirement applied in the organization. Is it consistent? And so you may say, I'm just going to focus on supplier management and just look at that across the organization. We're doing a supplier management audit focus across the entire company. So that is 5, which is the element method. And the last one, which kind of comes to anyone who's ever worked in quality, is the most playful one and the one that's easiest to learn, and that is the discovery method. So the discovery method is just pulling on the thread. So here you're just pulling on the thread, pulling on the string, and you're just kind of following your gut and instinct and trying to see where it goes. This is best used for unfamiliar areas, for cause audits or inspections, or if an issue arises. Like you may be focusing on a specific area and you notice that the operators are following 2 different versions of the same SOP, or they're manufacturing 2 different versions of the same thing, but they only have one approved specification. You may say, all right, I'm going to pause on what I was doing and I'm going to focus on this because I discovered something. And then you just pull on that string. It's important to try and do this in a way that's controlled and disciplined, because it can be very hard, because it can be very easy to burn an entire day just following your gut and following a thread and losing potentially valuable audit time in doing that. So it's just important to really keep that in mind. And so to summarize the 6 auditing strategies, we have the tracing method. And for tracing, we're following one example, like we said, forward or backward. Then there's the process method. And here we're following one workflow. Then there's the process-based approach, where you're looking at the whole system and following the handoffs, interactions. Then there's the department method. And here you're going deep into one function. The element method checks on one requirement or process everywhere. We're doing a supplier quality audit across the entire organization. We're looking at doc controls across the entire organization. And then lastly, there's the discovery method, where you're pulling on the string, pulling the thread. Now, as we said, with each of these, they have their own pros and cons. And for one situation, one may not be useful as much as another one. So tracing is used best for where you're trying to verify that evidence is there from start to finish on one example, but it doesn't give you the whole view of the entire system because, again, you only have that one specific example. The process approach follows a single process. It may help identify efficiencies and weak points, but it doesn't require you to have solid process documentation all through and through because it's only following one workflow. The process-based approach will be a system-wide kind of audit, especially if you're looking at a standard. These tend to be super comprehensive, but they take a lot of time and resource and require a lot of planning. The department method focuses on one specific function, and it allows you to get deep insight into a single area and understand how that particular function performs, but it has a really narrow focus and doesn't really tell you much outside of that specific area. And the last one, the discovery method, helps surface issues that may be hidden. And it's really good at identifying unknown risks, but there's a real big risk of potential drift if you don't have the discipline. And so that is the 6 auditing strategies from the CQA body of knowledge. It's really helpful to know that when you're doing an audit, you can approach it in a bunch of different ways, and there's pros and cons to the approach that you take. It's important to employ the correct tactic when you're in a specific situation. And if you are considering signing up for the CQA exam or are already signed up but want to know how to pass it, take a look at the course link in the description, and I'll see you in the next video.